So we're going to talk about some more advanced kind of concepts to help you prevent getting COVID-19. So these are things that are useful whether or not you've been vaccinated. And we'll talk a lot about vaccines today. And I'm not trying to push vaccines on anybody. If you have chosen not to be vaccinated, I totally respect that. And I work with people who are unvaccinated too. So we want to look at all the different sides of these issues. The thing I want to do is tell you what we're going to talk about tonight. So I want to make sure that you are aware that we actually have 3 different aspects of the pandemic to talk about. And when you're reading and learning things about the pandemic and listening to the news and so forth, you want to look out for these things because they're very different issues. And when we're talking about the research, it really does make a difference. What are we talking about? So those 3 things are, is it a confirmed infection? Is it a serious illness? In other words, the person ends up in the hospital because of it, or is there death? And the statistics talk about those 3 different things. And often I find that they get lost in the sound bites. And it's really different when, for instance, we're talking about the efficacy of a medication or a vaccine or so forth. How effective is it? Is that because we're preventing infection, or we're preventing serious illness, or we're preventing death? So I'll go into more detail about that. We're going to discuss the changing nature of the pandemic. As we're all aware, we're now into the 3rd year of this, and it is not the same pandemic we had when in 2020 when we started. And so we'll talk about why that is and how to address that. We're going to talk specifically about factors that increase risk and what you can do about it, and then to detail what those practices are to help you reduce your risk. I have some instructions. I wanted to just start off with letting you know where you can find some information about the pandemic that I've put into handout form on my website. As you'll notice, I'm not Whole Health Solutions anymore. That practice doesn't exist. And I am doing telemedicine in, I think it's 13 states right now. And I am still licensed in North Carolina, still seeing plenty of people there. And the practice is now called Self-Empowered Healing. And so that's our new website. It'll look really similar to the old website. And so if you've gone to the Products and References tab, you click on that and then go into the references where it says Take Charge of Your Health. And then there's this pre-vaccination handout, which looks like this. I'm gonna just make us smaller so we're not taking up so much of the screen. And I mention this because if you are going to get vaccinated or you're getting boosters, you want to get the most benefit from that you can. And some things like the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs or NSAIDs and certain types of herbs, this is things like ibuprofen, aspirin, or if you are on prescription steroids or other certain types of prescription NSAIDs, those actually interfere with the immune response from the vaccine. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't take those things during the pandemic. What it means is that if possible, for the 2 days before and 2 days after the vaccine, you would not take those so that you could get the most response from your immune system from taking the vaccine. And if these are prescription things that you're on, you're going to really want to consult with your prescribing physician to determine whether it's safe for you to take those, to be off of them for 2 days. And also, of course, getting good sleep before your vaccine and afterwards is quite important. Getting back to those distinctions in research and reports, again, we have 3 different aspects of the pandemic. That's confirmed infection. In other words, they have a positive approved laboratory test for COVID-19, which is also called the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Serious illness, which usually involves lung problems or blood clotting problems. Those people generally end up in the hospital or the ICU. And then, of course, we know that the virus causes death. And an important thing that I wanted to make you aware about is that seems to have skipped a lot of people's radar. This virus, and I'm going to specifically point at the virus rather than vaccine issues. This is a coronavirus. And as you probably know, coronaviruses have been around for a long time. They're one of the 400 viruses that cause the common cold. And we've never been able to make a vaccine against the common cold because it's a really elusive virus. And that's also true of all the different vaccines for COVID-19. They do not prevent the virus from entering your cells and being present either silently or as an active infection. So some people say, well, I've been vaccinated. I don't need to wear a mask. I don't need to social distance and those sorts of things. And this is actually not true. It's one of the reasons that Omicron is so rapidly passing right now. It is a more contagious version of the virus, but we have so many people who think that because they're vaccinated, they really don't need to pay attention to some of those more important ways of prevention, and that's simply not true. And so both for yourself and if you care about passing this to someone else, I do encourage you to use the masks, the social distancing, the hand washing, as the CDC recommends. And I want to point out that although we are not having the government required mandated lockdowns like we did 2 years ago, the Omicron variant is still very serious. It is still killing people, and you don't want to get sick if you don't have to. And so I don't expect the government to put us into lockdown again because it had such a serious effect on the economy. And we don't know how effective that is in preventing the spread of the virus. However, I do encourage people to really minimize large gatherings. I've had a number of patients who are at things like funerals and weddings that large numbers of people there got the virus. And I'm talking as recently as last week. So you can use your own effective choice in the places that you go and doing things like masking up and so forth. And we're going to also talk about things like prevention things that you might want to do before going to an airport or some of those more risky situations. I also want to point out that a lot of the ideas that we have developed about the pandemic, you know, they basically started about 2 years ago, and we're still going off of research that was done on those variants that are really no longer in the population. I mean, right now, almost everyone who's getting it is getting Omicron. And so even what we knew, say, 2 months ago about Delta variant is not necessarily applicable to the pandemic that we're dealing with right now. There is, for instance, some evidence that Omicron may be causing less serious disease, which is a good thing, except it does seem to be much more contagious, particularly for young people and children, and many of whom have not been vaccinated. And just to illustrate the point of what more contagious means, if we had a variant of the virus that was, say, 50% more dangerous. In other words, it caused 50% more serious disease. If we took the original alpha variant and said, okay, 100 people in 10,000 are going to get sick, and 50% of those are going to end up in the hospital, with the more dangerous variants. But if the variant is more contagious, it will actually be 900 times more people who get sick, simply because more people are exposed. And so, although it may not be as serious a disease, the contagiousness of it does make it more concern for all of us. And as I said, you know, having the vaccine doesn't prevent you from getting Omicron. It does prevent you from serious illness and death, which is the purpose of the vaccine. They never said it prevented the infection, but be aware of those issues. And so as the virus mutates, we don't know whether any of our weapons. So for instance, when you look at monoclonal antibodies, we have 3 or 4, depending on whether you consider the one that was just released. But of the ones that have been out, 2 of the 3 monoclonal antibodies don't work against Omicron. And so this is, of course, another concern. So this is what happens with microorganisms, particularly viruses. They are very good at reproducing themselves in a way that avoids whatever we're doing to prevent them from hurting us. You probably know this idea as antibiotic resistance. You know, you've had an infection and it's resistant to an antibiotic. The same thing happens with viruses. They outsmart our weapons. Let's talk about risk and what actually causes risk. When you look at who actually has serious illness. So I'm going to assume that we all have a certain baseline risk of getting infection. So for the moment, I'm focusing on the issues of serious illness and death, because we may get the infection. But even if you get it, you want to get over it fast. You don't want it to turn into serious infection. You want to not have long-haul COVID syndrome. And so the things that we're going to talk about in terms of your terrain. So the terrain is like your soil, where the virus can either get a foothold or not. And what we're going to talk about is how to try to avoid it getting a foothold. So all of us, I think, are extremely stressed out after 2 years of pandemic, if nothing else, you know, let alone politics and all the other crazy things going on in our world, and whatever personal issues you have. But stress has very real physical effects. It's not simply a mental, emotional thing. And so particularly related to the virus, cortisol is our stress hormone, and that tends to go up when we are stressed. And cortisol, you know, is basically the same thing that steroids are. And as we know, steroids suppress the immune system. Well, so does the cortisol that your body produces in response to stress. And so it decreases things like mucus production. Mucus is one of the barriers of the body, which tries to trap the virus before it gets into your lungs and so forth. And it also reduces your protective antibodies, such as the secretory IgA. So those are physical effects from stress. So anything that you can do to reduce your physical response to stress, and I will tell you that self-care things, taking care of yourself, eating right, exercise, meditation has been shown to be one of the things that has the best reduction of stress effects on the body. So I certainly encourage people to do those kinds of things. We're going to talk a lot more about the gut microbiome. These are the flora that live in your gut. 2/3 of your immune system is in your gut. And that's actually very closely related to what's going on with your lung immune response, which we know is so very important in COVID-19. And that lung response, if you are already inflamed due to imbalance of flora in your gut or other places in the body, that's what we think tips people over the edge and causes the fluid to accumulate in their lungs, triggers the blood clotting mechanisms. That is what people are dying from. I do want to mention there's a specific kind of probiotic. We're starting to now learn that probiotics can be used in a targeted manner. So it's not just general probiotics. And you see this K12 at the end of the name here. So it's that specific strain of Strep salivarius K12. And I'll give you some references where you can buy these things toward the end of the program. That actually can reduce lung inflammation. So certainly if you do get the virus, you would want to be taking this. So you might want to have a stock on hand at home. And if you go out into a high-risk situation like an airport, then you might want to be taking something like that to help protect you. We're going to talk a lot more about vitamins and trace elements that are cofactors of the immune system, and also how these things, which are basically antioxidants, are depleted by various toxins, which are oxidants. And so what we want is antioxidants, and what we end up with lots of toxins that are oxidants. And I want to point out a couple that are really, really common that reduce your immune response. Tylenol or acetaminophen markedly reduces your ability to get rid of toxins, and also alcohol, beer, wine, and spirits. Those use up your antioxidants, and therefore they make you more vulnerable. So we're going to talk about a number of lifestyle things that cause inflammation, the way we eat, lack of exercise, stress, poor sleep habits, all of those contribute to risk. So let's talk more about chronic inflammation. That is the biggest trigger of what is called cytokine storm. You may have heard this term because this is what kills people with COVID-19. And that cytokine storm is actually an overaction of the immune system. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about this idea of immune boosting and whether you really want to do that. What we really want to do is modulate the immune system, not stimulate it. We know that many of the people that are admitted to the ICU with the SARS-CoV-2 infection already have high levels of these inflammatory factors. And the one noted here called a heat shock protein 17 is specifically predicts mortality. The biggest risk factor is actually having a body mass index over 30, and also overweight is when your body mass index is between 25 and 30. You can actually have a normal body mass index, BMI, and have what is called metabolic syndrome, which is a combination of high blood pressure, high blood sugar, even if you don't have diabetes. So metabolic syndrome is another significant risk factor. Obesity causes inflammation, and inflammation causes weight gain. And it also causes oxidative stress, which is the result of those oxidants and toxins that I talked about. The number one risk factor is actually belly fat. So even if you have a body mass index of 25 or less, but you have an increased waist to hip ratio. So this is measuring your waist about where the belly button is and comparing that to the widest part of your hips with a tape measure. That should be less than 1. And if it's higher than that, like this fella here, his waist is clearly much bigger than his hips, that is the most likely thing that will put you in the ICU. And that actually increases your risk 2.5 times, whereas even age alone only increases it about 1.4 times. We've learned a lot about chronic inflammation, short-term inflammation, like when you cut yourself or you get an acute infection, that actually can be beneficial. But long-term inflammation, where we are inflamed for years at a time, actually causes all these different kinds of diseases. And I highlighted depression there simply because even mental illnesses have been found to be related to inflammation. These are not simply things that are happening in our heads. And of course, with all the isolation and anxiety and so forth that's been provoked by the pandemic, a lot more people are experiencing mental illness. But if you have any of these issues listed here, you pretty likely have inflammation. And so if you are, for instance, taking high blood pressure medicine, that doesn't do anything for the inflammation. And these things are what puts you at greater risk of serious illness and death, the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Just talking a little bit about detoxification and energy production, because they both have very specific benefits to helping you prevent the virus. And they are both dependent on what's going on in your gut, which we're going to talk about more. And I want to just bring your attention to a very interesting paper that said that deficiency of glutathione, which is a very important antioxidant and a detoxifier that is made in your body, and it's very commonly deficient, that may be the thing that pushes people into serious illness and death. And so, as I mentioned, Tylenol and alcohol actually deplete this antioxidant. And so one of the things that I consider for prevention is N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, and glutathione to help make sure that you have plenty of reserves of that. So basically, what this all comes down to is that you literally are what you eat, or actually what your microbes eat. That's what's, we have 3 to 5 pounds of these things in our guts. And even more importantly, what you absorb out of that. And of course, the toxins are what you don't eliminate. And so those are all the cumulative products of what you're messaging your cells, which is why we're going to talk about lifestyle factors so much. So I want to just address some concerns about vaccines and boosters. Many people still have questions about these. Again, give some relative risk and statistics to help us understand what should go into your thought process as you're making decisions about this. There have been close to 4.6 billion people worldwide who've had at least one dose of the vaccine. I think it's about 3.5 billion who've gotten 2 doses. When you look at the rate of adverse effects, that's the number of people who had something bad happen to them because of the vaccine. That's 0.001% of those 4.6 billion doses. Almost all of those, 86% of that, was a reaction to the vaccine called anaphylaxis, which is your typical allergy. It is usually occurring within 15 minutes of getting the vaccine, and it's easily reversed with medication. So it doesn't really kill people. Whereas we look at the number of people who are being killed in the United States, which now is mostly the ones dying are the unvaccinated, that's about 1.4% of the people who get sick. So of the people who get infection, about 1.4% of them are dead. 1.4% is actually 10,000 times higher than this 0.001%. While that doesn't say that the vaccine is without possible side effects or that it doesn't have potential dangers to the vaccine, your dangers from the virus itself are significantly higher. Now, if you've already been vaccinated and you're wondering whether you need to get a booster or not, and I'm showing Pfizer data here because they had the best data that I could find. It's similar for Moderna. It's much lower for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and the other ones we don't have in the United States, so I'm not addressing those. There is evidence that the 2 doses of the vaccine starts decreasing in effectiveness at 30 days, and by 90 days, it's been reduced from 95% effective to 78% effective. 4 months after you get the vaccine, in real world numbers, they're showing about 70% effectiveness against just getting the infection. So again, not perfect. 30% of people can still get the infection, even if they've had the vaccine, but it's still pretty effective against severe illness and death, over 90%. The booster effectiveness has been measured, and it's 11.3 times less likely to get a confirmed infection. So it even though it doesn't 100% prevent the infection, it does definitely reduce risk, and it's almost 20% less likely to get severe illness. And it does restore the protection to 95% in the real world setting. How long that lasts, we don't know. There's still so many things we don't know about this pandemic, and that's one of the things we don't know. I do want to make a special comment for people who have autoimmune diseases or chronic neurodegenerative diseases, things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic Epstein-Barr virus, other chronic infections. I think that's a case-by-case decision that you really want to talk with your healthcare providers about, because there is perhaps some increased risk of aggravating those underlying conditions with the vaccine. That has been reported, but again, you are also at higher risk of serious illness and death if you get sick because of those conditions. So it's kind of between a rock and a hard place. And what I try to do with people in those circumstances is to weigh the risks and use a heavy dose of your intuition about what is right for you to do and your body. Risk factors really start in the roots, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about. That's where inflammation starts, toxicity starts, sedentary lifestyle, and so forth. And we're really going to focus on these 5 lifestyle issues. And I want to just draw your attention to the fact that social factors and connection are really very important to the immune system and your health in general. And that is made very hard by this pandemic. We all have probably seen less of our friends and family, and we're doing this by Zoom instead of in live situations. And so I think basically you have to really commit yourself to how are you going to stay connected with other people. Do you create regular Zoom things or game nights or other things with people in your family so that you can maintain those social connections, because again, they have very real physical benefits. So let's talk more about specific root causes of inflammation. Elevated blood glucose, as I mentioned, it's both a cause and a result of inflammation. And that is basically, if your hemoglobin A1C is above 5.7, that becomes a concern. We've talked about 2/3 of the immune system being in the gut. So it's the biggest repository of your immune system. As we know, there's no such thing as sterile food. And this is why so much of your immune system is concentrated in your gut, because your gut is really exposed to everything that you take in. If you do have an autoimmune disease, such as rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, MS, hidden infections like parasites, Epstein-Barr virus, Lyme disease, those are obviously inflammatory things that are attacking the immune system. We've talked a little bit about stress and its effects on the autonomic nervous system and the HPA axis, and that affects very much your immune system's ability to kick this out. And we've also talked somewhat about toxins. So those are our basic things that we want to focus on. And I do really encourage people to notice their thoughts. I think, especially if we're at home watching the television and on the internet, there is so much negativity out there. It is really hard to overcome it. I strongly recommend news fasts, where you simply stop watching the news for a while. If you find yourself addicted to looking up the latest COVID-19 information on the internet, you might want to take a break from that, even if it's just one day a week or something like that, because those thoughts also have very real effects on our immune systems. And so I encourage you to notice if you are using disempowering thinking. So if you're scared to go someplace, or you're trying to make a decision about whether the pandemic affects your ability to do something that you want, that fear alone is taxing on your immune system. And so try to think about a more empowering way that you can do this. For instance, I'd really like to attend that gathering, but I'm taking care of myself, and so I'm going to avoid it. Or whatever it happens to be, but you can perhaps hear the difference between, I'm afraid to go there, I hate this pandemic because it's restricting me from doing what I want to do, versus I'm making choices that allow me to stay safe and healthy. So that's what I mean about trying to make a more empowering thought in your self-talk. These are the Magnificent Seven from one of my great teachers, and these are the things we really have control over in our lives. And they all go into how your immune system is working. We're going to talk about them much more. So I want to start off with like the simplest things to make sure that you are taking control of those, and then we'll get more complex. Hydration, we know, is extremely important, especially in the summertime in North Carolina. And so you're supposed to drink approximately half your lean body weight in water every day. Things that have bubbles, caffeine, or even natural sugars like fruit juices don't count, because they actually suck water out of your body to process them. So when I'm talking about water, I'm talking about herbal teas and just good, clean water. Getting plenty of sleep is extremely important. I just bring up the issue that if you have to take strong medicines like Xanax or Valium to help you fall asleep, there are concerns about the long-term effects of these drugs. They have not been proven, but they have been associated with memory loss and increased cancer risk. So we want to figure out how to get good sleep without drugs. Elimination these are my top 3 rules for everyone, no matter what your health status is, no matter where you're going with your health. You have to drink plenty of water, you have to get enough sleep, and you basically have to poop every day. And we like to poop snakes, not rocks. This is a sign of a good digestive system. And so if you're not pooping every day, again, we need to look at that and figure out how to get that to happen. Movement and exercise is really important. The goal is about 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise. And interestingly, exercise is actually one of the things that helps us poop. Certainly encourage exercise. And I know, again, people who are used to going to the gym, they may not be wanting to do that. And so trying to find places you can walk outside, even if it's, or home exercise equipment, if the weather is bad and so forth, is really important in that focus on self-care. And we're going to talk more about these other issues, controlling blood sugar, inflammation, hormones, and toxins. You probably mostly know why you need to drink water. Basically, all of the chemicals in your body have to be in soup. They need to move around. Like, you can put all the things for soup in the pot, but you don't put the water and you don't get soup. So you have to have the water in order to make everything else function and to clean out the wastes and toxins. And so that's why hydration is so important. We talked about things that make you need more water, like caffeine and any kind of carbonated beverage. Some things can help you actually retain the water inside the cell. So if you are somebody who gets, for instance, swollen ankles or swollen fingers, that's because your water is leaking outside the cell. And so things like fish oil, omega-3s, and electrolytes such as magnesium, calcium, potassium, zinc, those help you keep the water inside the cell. We've talked some about stress. It does have very real effects on your body. We also are learning that stress actually has very significant effects on brain function. If you have any concerns about that, we also need to figure out how to reduce the effects of stress on the body. That doesn't mean we can necessarily change the fact that there's a pandemic going on, but we can reduce the effects on the body. This is some of the ways that stress actually affects your body. So if you are a gazelle running away from a lion, you are going to increase your blood glucose. You're going to actually decrease some of your hormones. You'll increase those inflammatory cytokines that I mentioned. You remember that term, cytokine storm, which is what kills people with COVID-19. It downregulates your immune system. I'm reading these things off of that third column there. When the gazelle is running away from the lion, it does not stop and repair anything. It is just running to get its butt away from the lion. Once it has done that, it then discharges that. And if you watched the animal, you'd see it paw the ground and shake and huff and puff and pant. That's discharging all that energy. But humans don't tend to do that. We store all that stress energy in our bodies 24/7, which is why we have so many problems with diabetes and high blood pressure and heart disease. Sleep, I cannot emphasize more, it's not optional. Whatever you think that you have to do that takes away from that 7 to 8 hours a night of sleep, it honestly is not, because it's really putting you at much greater risk. All of these things are actually happening during sleep. It's not just downtime. It's when we get rid of toxins. It's when our growth hormone is made, and it's when neurotransmitters are made, and obviously the immune system works the best at night. So getting that good undisturbed sleep is extremely important. Blood glucose. Glucose is the more technical term for sugar, and I prefer that term because some people think that if they don't eat sweets like donuts and candy, that they aren't raising their blood glucose. But most of us, 60% of calories in the standard American diet, we call it the SAD diet, are actually from wheat, corn, and potatoes. Those are all very, very high glycemic index foods. In other words, they turn into sugar in your body quickly. And so these are some other things. I'm a big fan of eating fruit, but there are a couple of fruits that a lot of people with blood sugar issues tend to eat. A lot of pineapple and bananas. You know, they make smoothies and they put pineapple and bananas in it. You'd be much better off with lower glycemic index fruits such as apples, peaches, pears, plums, and berries. Your immune system is very dependent on steady blood glucose. And when we eat these high glycemic index foods, they cause sharp rises in our blood sugar, and that disables the immune system each time it happens. And so, for instance, if you eat toast for breakfast, that drives up your blood sugar, and then you're going to crash probably mid-morning. And so you eat some other high glycemic index fruit or something like a banana, and so you end up the whole day long peaking and dropping, which is very hard for the immune system and your endocrine system to cope with. You can see here, these are the top 10 sources of calorie in our diet, in the standard American diet. And most of these are very high glycemic index foods. Even the things that are protein, like the chicken and beef and so forth, are often made or sandwiched. You know, they're breaded, or they're put into a sandwich, or they're put on pasta or something else that contributes to a high glycemic index. So I really encourage people to use the opposite of the food pyramid that they may have seen before. I don't encourage even whole grains, and things like quinoa have a very high glycemic index. They turn into sugar quickly in the bloodstream. And so I try to minimize those and eat lots more fruits, veggies, good fats, and clean proteins, and make that the bottom of your pyramid. If you have any kinds of gastrointestinal issues, irritable bowel syndrome, constipation, diarrhea, we use what we call the 5R program, where we basically remove things like parasites or bacteria that you don't need. We replace factors like enzymes and biofactors that help you actually digest your food better. We make sure you are re-inoculated with good bacteria. I mentioned one specific probiotic that can help COVID-19. We want to repair that lining of the gut. I'm going to talk a little bit more about leaky gut syndrome because it's such a big issue in terms of immunity. And then rebalance is all about those lifestyle factors. So that's stress management, it's sleep, and so forth. And so you have to keep those bowels moving. If you're having frequent diarrhea, however, then something else is going on, and we need to look at that as well. I mentioned the microbiome. Hopefully you've heard that term before. 90% of the cells in the human body are not human DNA. That they live everywhere. They're on your skin, they're all throughout your digestive tract, everywhere from the mouth to the other end. They're in your lungs, they're on your eyeballs, they're in your bloodstream, they're everywhere. And they're actually working in close concert with your immune system. And so I refer to them as friendlies and unfriendlies rather than good and bad. Obviously, we want more friendlies. Those are the ones that are like allies to our immune system. And we want to reduce the population of the unfriendlies. And this is one of the main reasons that I talked about blood glucose so much, because those high glycemic index foods that turn into sugar in the bloodstream, the unfriendlies love those. And they tend to overfeed the unfriendlies and cause more problems, and that affects the immune system. There are now a number of diseases that are associated with these unfriendlies. And, everything from acne to mental health disorders, as I mentioned, to obesity itself has been distinctly related to an altered microbiome. I do a lot of work with people to help them improve that. And just a realistic note here, this is a lot more than simply taking probiotics. It often takes, I would say, minimum between 3 to 6 months to change somebody's microbiome if they have issues with that. One of the reasons is leaky gut syndrome. Basically, the gut is a sieve. It's designed to allow in the correct nutrients and keep everything else out, because even perfectly good organic vegetables and so forth has parts of it that we were never intended to absorb. And so when that breaks down for a number of reasons, that can then allow those toxins to enter the bloodstream and circulate all the way through the body. And I'm going to mention this here because it is one of the issues. There is some evidence that in all of us, whether or not we have gluten sensitivity, gluten is the protein from wheat, barley, and rye, all of us get a certain level of leaky gut when we eat any amount of gluten, and that lasts for a minimum of 7 days. So people who tell me that they only eat it occasionally, they only go out and have pizza night on Saturdays or something, they are essentially never allowing their gut to completely heal. And so I do think that actually trying to eliminate gluten can be a strategy for improving your immune system. So that's a part of a much bigger topic, but I want to make you aware of that. Here we see the effects of leaky gut. I want to point out that physical stress contributes to the leaks. Various medications do. Dietary proteins, as I just mentioned, gluten's one of those, all different kinds of infection. Here we see the cytokines that are the big issue in COVID-19. It affects your ability to digest by affecting your enzymes, affecting what's going on in your brain, and causing significant immune system abnormalities. Because again, 2/3 of your immune system is in your gut. So what if you don't have any gastrointestinal symptoms and you say, well, that's not my problem? Well, it actually may be. And I put this picture here of this person's tongue. This was a man who has multiple sclerosis. He has absolutely no GI symptoms. He can eat whatever he wants. And you see this very thick coating on the tongue, and there's this yellow deposits in the back of it. That's not a healthy tongue. And the gut is a tube. Whatever's going on in the mouth is the same thing that's going on all the way down, which is one of the reasons why I look at tongues a lot when I examine people, because it tells us a lot about what's going on there. And so that's something you can go look in the mirror and see if you have a lot of coating or cracks. Sometimes people have a lot of cracks or even denuded areas where there's like no taste buds in those spots. It looks like a map and we call it geographic tongue. Those are all signs that you may have leaky gut going on. So I certainly want to encourage people to eat at least 5 to 7 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. What you'll find is that if you fill up your plate with more colors, especially more colored fruits and vegetables, you'll actually end up eating less of some of those high glycemic index foods. And they really have, all those colors have all kinds of factors in them called phyto, P-H-Y-T-O, phytonutrients that build your immune system and help your body in many different ways. So I like to use this guide of the 4 C's of what to eat. I tend to think of things that come directly out of the ground and are not processed as being very important. We talked about color, try to have every meal be a rainbow. When you have to chew it more and it has more texture, many of those things have more fiber, which also helps you with the immune system in the gut. And portion sizes do count. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about exercise. Exercise is crucial for the immune system, even if that's perhaps staying at home and tuning into a yoga show on the internet, or walking, or in your neighborhood, or socially distanced away from people out in nature. But any kind of exercise, we want to avoid being sedentary, because that is a big risk for the immune system. We talked a little bit about mitochondria, and I'm going to focus on them mostly because of this removal of unwanted compounds. Mitochondria, as you may know, those are the little powerhouses in your cells that turn your food into energy, which of course energy is extremely important, but this detox aspect of mitochondria is crucial. And so I want us to all think about toxins. Some of them we voluntarily do, like alcohol, and in some states, marijuana is now legal and so forth. But even things like prescription medicines, over-the-counter medicines, even supplements, different kinds of herbs and so forth can actually pose some issues in increasing levels of toxins in the body. And so all of those things we want to minimize, and again, get more of those phytonutrients from plants if we can. We are living in a chemical soup where it is really hard to avoid toxins. And one of the things that I help people to become more aware of in your choices is the FDA permits 1,000 times greater amounts of pesticides on animal food than it does on plant food for human consumption. So if you're trying to figure out where to spend your organic food dollars, it actually makes much more difference to eat our organic animal products, eggs, milk, meat, chicken, fish, and so forth. I would really avoid farmed fish like tilapia and any kind of salmon that doesn't say wild on it. They have 10 times the amount of carcinogens in them. GMO foods, this is the issue with GMO, it allows the farmers to put 11 times more pesticides on the food for human consumption when they're GMO. And so this is why you don't want GMO things, because they are increasing your toxin levels. When you're thinking about steps to detoxify, I showed this picture here with the water with lemon or lime juice in it. Drinking the juice of 1 or 2 lemons in 16 ounces of water first thing in the morning actually gets detoxification going in your body. It's a simple thing that you can do at home. And it's pretty much fine for virtually everybody. There's no dangers from it. You want to avoid unnecessary toxins if you can. Things like massage and exercise that promote circulation actually help you get rid of toxins. And then there's more advanced ways of toxins detoxifying that I work on with individual patients. And I do recommend actually consulting a physician knowledgeable about detoxification for that, because I have seen some people who went out and just did some kind of packaged cleanse or something and really had serious problems for it. It can cause gallbladder problems and other issues. And so if you have any specific health conditions, it's wise to consult a functional medicine physician about those things. So we talked about the colors in foods being very helpful and water being very helpful. Those are choices that you can start making right away to help yourself detoxify. I want to let you know about this powerful mind-body exercises that I have learned about. It's a big part of the way I am working with people now, because the research is absolutely astounding. Tomorrow, there's actually going to be a conference that's going to release the research about using very specific kinds of mind-body exercises, breath control, meditations, very specific kinds of those that reduce your risk of getting COVID-19 by 55%. And in a large worldwide study that they did, they actually showed a dose effect so that people who did these meditations and breath work most days of the week, even when they got the COVID-19 infection, they healed rapidly with very mild effects. And so this research has been done by a number of researchers, but some of the most specific stuff about COVID-19 has been done by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And I just gave you some examples here of things that you can get off of his website to learn how to do these. If you are interested in the science behind it, which is considerable, the formula and the intensive and progressive online course detail not only the meditation and breath techniques, but also the science behind that. Let's just review your plan for optimal immunity. You want to get good hydration, plenty of sleep, make sure you're pooping every day, get some kind of movement or exercise, more colored food, less processed foods, trying to have more unprocessed food and fewer grains and root vegetables like potatoes to help your blood sugar spikes. Or if you would like more specific consultation and things tailored to your specific condition, I also do what I call Life Source Yum consultations, because we really try to give you access to a wider variety of food and make them yummy, things that are easy to prepare and that you'll enjoy eating. So I do that in a Life Source Yum consultation. That is actually included if you end up doing something like what I call the self-empowered healing journey, which I'll talk more about in a moment. And I mentioned here some testing. If you don't get your hemoglobin A1C tested every year by your doctor, I strongly recommend it if you are over the age of 40 to look for signs of high blood sugar before it becomes diabetes. And we can look for other tests that specifically look at your mitochondria and toxin levels and so forth. So I want to talk about some specific agents to modulate your immune system. This is not boosting or revving up your immune system. That's a misnomer, because the problem with COVID-19 is that it over revs the immune system, and that's what ends up people in the hospital. And again, we think that is due to their underlying inflammatory conditions. And I just want to tell you before I talk about any specific agents that there is very little data about how these things work specifically against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Some of them have data against the SARS-CoV-1 virus that some of you may remember from about 10 or 15 years ago. And some of the information is deduced from other viral studies. I can't tell you that there's specific data about this. One of the reasons I don't recommend taking things like echinacea or elderberry regularly is because they do boost the immune system. They can be used for short-term illnesses, but I'm concerned that if you have a positive COVID-19 test, that they could possibly push you over into the cytokine storm. So I actually don't use those in a positive COVID-19 situation. But some of the other things that I'm going to talk about are perfectly safe. They have extremely minimal side effects. And so they can be used if you are, for instance, somebody you visited tells you they had COVID-19, or you're in a high-risk situation like a plane flight, or if you have an early positive case with or without symptoms. Prevention, and we're talking about different doses for prevention than we are if you actually have a confirmed infection. And I'll show you the doses for the confirmed infection for in just a moment. And I want you to know that these, you can go and look up the research yourself if you want to see the evidence base for these recommendations. It's a website called Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance. These are doctors who are taking care of these COVID-19 patients in the ICU and what they have come up with by looking at the research. Gargling with mouthwash twice a day can actually be a prevention. And there's specific kinds of mouthwash. This cetylpyridinium chloride that you see there is actually an inactive ingredient in Scope and Act and Crest. And so that's the thing that is antiviral. It's actually been shown to be more antiviral than Listerine. So I think if you're going to do it, I might pick one of those. The doses of vitamin D, really important for prevention, at least 1,000 to 3,000 units a day. And you'll want to look on all of your supplement labels and kind of add everything up and see what you're getting, because some people forget that they're getting some from a multivitamin and some from a different supplement. Vitamin C is protective. Something called quercetin, which is a bioflavonoid. It's a herbal derived product that is very protective of the lungs. So I highly recommend that. Zinc also has a prevention dose and has been shown to be quite important. Zinc deficiency is a big risk factor for ending up in the ICU. Melatonin, and I'm specifically mentioning melatonin here because of its anti-inflammatory and antiviral effects, not to help with sleep. And we're talking about bigger doses than what most people use for sleep. And so melatonin can actually be part of your prevention plan. Put a picture here of the products and references page on my website. And if you click the full script link, you will be able to have access to this protocol where I've put all these things together. And I now also, since I made this picture, I have put a link to another company called Welevate, because some of these things are in such short supply because everyone's using them that it can be hard to get them. Like quercetin can be a little hard to get right now. And I wanted to give you a couple of options. There's another link on my website called DSS Orders. So that gives you 3 places that you may be able to find these things, in addition to Whole Foods, the Vitamin Shop, and some of your other sources. We try to vet the high quality supplements, and so that's what I have recommended for people. I also am pointing out this button that says condition-specific evidence-based supplements. So I have protocols on there for many different conditions if you want to see what supplements might be beneficial for your particular condition. But again, I stress that it's not about taking supplements for prevention. It's really about things like getting enough sleep and water, getting enough fruits and vegetables, getting your exercise. Those are the real prevention things. If you do test positive, then you can start these higher doses. You would actually use the antiviral mouthwash. And we're talking about actually gargling, not just swishing it around in your mouth, but actually, so that it's back down where the virus lives in the back of your throat. You can use iodine nasal spray or drops right in your nose where the virus lives. They're antiviral. Aspirin has some antiviral effects, but there are some reasons people cannot take aspirin. And then you see we have bigger doses here of all the different vitamins. They're basically like doubled from those prevention doses. There are some other things you can do. Again, foods have more of an impact, but leeks and stinging nettle are leeks as used to can be used in food, and stinging nettle, you make a tea out of it. Those have some specific molecules that are active against the virus. NAC, or N-acetylcysteine, is something that makes glutathione in the body. And remember, we talked about glutathione deficiency as being a big risk factor for ending up in the ICU. You can actually take liposomal glutathione. It's the only type of glutathione I recommend that you take because the other ones are not very absorbable. It is expensive and it has to be taken on an empty stomach. So the NAC is a less expensive way to do that. We talked about the Strep salivarius, K12, a probiotic. Curcumin and resveratrol have very good anti-inflammatory effects. I actually use them in inflammatory diseases, and they have some specific antiviral effects. And ECGC, which is from green tea, you can drink up to 4 cups of tea a day, but I do not recommend taking more than 225 milligrams if you're taking a supplement because it can have toxicities at higher doses. I am offering a 30-minute COVID-19 personal prevention consultation. We talk about high-risk conditions. There are some medications that are being used as possible prevention that we can talk about. We can personalize your supplement prescription and you'll get a written consultation summary with it. And then I mentioned what I'm calling the self-empowered healing journey, which is what I'm doing with people now. This is 10 hours of individualized consultation with me, and we really go in depth to look at risk factors in your health history. We can even go all the way back into your childhood to look for risk factors. The detailed personalized nutrition consultation and meal planning is part of that journey. And I offer everyone a free discovery session, which you can just sign up yourself on the website for that to find out whether that might be something that you're interested in and if it's applicable to you. We would use the functional medicine approach, which is this picture of the functional medicine tree here. And we would go deeply into what those root cause triggers are to help change your health for the long term. I have detailed videos that are on my YouTube channel. I talk in detail about the 7 essential functions of health, which is really what we've been talking about today, the things like getting your immune system into balance, balancing hormones, detoxification, improving circulation, and so forth. Those are all different videos there. These are these 7 essential functions here. And I mentioned this organic acids test because it's a really useful tool for helping us get to those root causes and find out where the broken links are. And this test is a simple urine test done at home, often paid for by insurance or Medicare. And so I just like people to know that there is testing that can help us figure out whether you have some of these root cause risk factors. I'm ready to take any kind of questions now.
Dr. Pizzino, you did a great job of going over all the details. Great refresher as well as new information. So thank you very much. So the only question that I have is on these vaccines, have they been linked to benefits for other medical conditions other than COVID-19? Or are they just focusing on COVID-19?
That's an interesting question. I have not personally seen data about that. I'd have to go look for it to see whether they can benefit other conditions. As far as I know, they're quite specific for this virus. And as the virus continues to mutate, we're not even sure right now whether booster doses actually work against Omicron. So, that's an unknown. I wish you all a good evening, and it is my sincerest hope that you all stay very healthy and well. Things are evolving, and we don't know what directions it's going to take, but I keep a hopeful attitude. Just to kind of give you my own thoughts. And there are other people out there who are speculating, and I'm emphasizing it's speculation, because the Omicron is moving through the population like wildfire, and it does seem to be affecting young people and children. It's possible that this will be part of the way that the pandemic burns itself out. And that although it's not a good thing right now with so many people getting sick and the healthcare system is just absolutely overwhelmed, if you can avoid going to a doctor, I would. Yeah, many doctors are offering telemedicine now. And as you saw, I'm actually in lots of other states. So if you have friends or family that want to use telemedicine, we can do that. This is why I'm thinking, maybe we spend this winter isolated again and keep ourselves from being part of the pandemic or passing it to someone else. And maybe by summer, we'll be looking at a different pandemic. So again, that's my empowering thought. Rather than being afraid of this thing, how can I take this as something that can make me feel more empowered? So hopefully I've given you all some empowering thoughts this evening.
You have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.